welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks ? Kicks.
Boo! Wow. The microphone not working.
Terrible.
But listen, we're getting set for UFC Fight Night. It's Vegas 75. And when we do have a look at it, I mean, Marvin Vettori taking on Cannonier in that main event. And the craziest part about it is when you look at a main event like this, I've seen some of the dumbest arguments for and against for both of these fighters all week long. Like, people haven't watched either guy fight, and they just go off of memory and have no real facts and basis in, you know, actual reality when it does come to this one. But Matt, we have a slate of fights that was originally supposed to be 14. It is now 12. Out is the Jaga Zhumagulov fight against Felipe Bunis. Felipe Bunis, a little bit of USADA complications coming into this one. Zhumagulov shuffled to next weekend's card. That's the big ABC card down in Florida. So for Jalgas, what's that, a 4 straight weight cut to get ready for?
Kind of wild, yeah.
Hopefully he actually gets a fight. And ultimately, when you do look at it for a guy like Zhumagulov, big fight against Joshua Van. Everybody's excited about that. We also had Raoni Barcelos, who's supposed to be taking on Miles Johns. Johns is out. Hopefully Raoni can find a fight. But when we do look at this one overall, Matt, co-main event kind of is what it is when you look at Tsarukyan versus Silva. But this main event, a lot of people excited about it.
I'm really excited for the main event personally because I've said it all week long. It's one of those fights where, okay, Cannonier and Vettori, they both fought a lot of guys in the top 15. So how many more opportunities are they going to have to still fight sort of the elite tier of the division? Because it happens. Remember, you had called out the UFC last week because Aldana, who was ranked behind Pennington in the rankings, getting the title shot. But you know what I mean? Everybody in that top 5, top 4 could realistically fight for the title. So these guys aren't really going to get that many more chances at fighting people in that top tier. So I think it is a really important fight for the career of both. And I've seen people call it out in the chat. Cannonier's 39 years old now and in his 3rd weight class. So again, you wonder how many more chances he's going to get, but this is a pretty favorable matchup for him. Vettori's a guy who's going to go for a lot of takedowns, leave himself in some vulnerable positions. And we all know how weird Cannonier's power is. He can hit you from far away. He can hit you from up close. He's a guy who can really hurt you.
And the craziest part about this main event, before we go way too far, I look at this main event the same way I look at Tatsuro Taira, who's going to be fighting next weekend. Everybody's excited about him. He's 3-0. He's looked amazing. 2 bonuses last time out. And if you look at his last win over Jesus Aguilar, you go, wow, he got a triangle that was into an armbar. That's amazing. If you go back and watch the start of that round, he gets leg kicked and dropped. He gets back up to his feet, and then Aguilar goes in, just spider monkeys it, grabs the guillotine and holds on for 3 minutes. So some crazy ways to get there. But Matt, a lot of really interesting fights on this card. We'll throw it on over to our fight of the night screen. If you want to toss a like while we're doing it, that much would be appreciated. Matt, on the main card to open it up, you have Nicholas Dalby taking on Muslim Salikov. And Nicholas Dalby's second run in the UFC, it's been largely positive. He's 4-2 so far. Fight of the night, they've been few and far between, but the fight to get him back into the UFC, a no contest. You had that Ross Houston title fight where it was called a no contest because there was too much blood on the canvas. So Dalby taking on Muslim Salikov. If you watch the way that Dalby fought his last fight against Warley Alves, charging across the cage, going for broke, really trying to force the fight against Alves. And for Muslim Salikov, I mean, even in his loss to Li Jingliang a few fights ago, his last time out against Andrea Fialho, these two guys, They'll grapple when they need to grapple, but they're primarily strikers, and that's what makes it a fun battle.
And I think Dalby's going to bring the fight out of Salikov. Salikov's a guy who will try to wait for those big power shots, but if Dalby's right in his face for the majority of this fight, it's not really going to give him a lot of time to try to set up those bigger strikes. So I do think this is a very favorable matchup, not for either guy specifically odds-wise, but just in the fact that it should be a really fun fight. I think it should, again, stylistically bring out the best of both of them.
K DeMercy on the main event. Cannoniers are going to throw no matter how small the cage is. LMAO. Both guys combined 6-0 in the small cage. K DeMercy. Matt, our other pick for fight of the night. People were excited about this one in the chat. I saw that earlier. Manuel Torres taking on Nicolas Mata. This could be one of those like Matt Schnell, Brandon Royval 1 round, 2 round fight of the night type. These two guys are set to bang, and it's just going to be a matter of time before one of them gets finished. And I know Nicolas Mata, you go back and you look at it. Did he knock out Joe Selecki? Throws the right hand, throws the left hook. Joe Selecki's out. You look at Mata's last time out against Cameron Van Camp, same exact strike in combo. So you look at Mata against a guy like Torres who just only knows throwing his balls to the wall, and that's what makes this a fun fight.
Exactly. Just whose type of wild striking is going to win out. So that's going to result in a wild fight for everybody. And again, this is an odd fight because both guys are great strikers. Both guys like to move forward. So we'll be interested to see who's going to get the upper hand and really assert themselves to begin with. Because it might be a fight of whoever lands that first big strike, they sort of gain that confidence that they need, and they could finish it right away. So I agree with you 100%. This could be one of those rare one-round fight of the nights.
All right, Matt. It should be a big-time fight card in the main event. Again, Vettori taking on Cannonier. If you know the drill with question mark kicks, you know we're going to start at the bottom of the card and work our way all the way up to the top. This big-time fight, top 5 middleweights squaring off. Jared Cannonier, less hair, less beard. Marvin Vettori, same hair. Sometimes he grows the beard. It's a little bit of a weird look. He looks less sheepdog than, I don't know, King Corso? Is that a good Italian reference, Matt? We kick off this prelim portion of the card. We have Zach Pauga taking on Modestas Bukauskas, former Cage Warriors light heavyweight champ 2 times for the Baltic Gladiator. And as I said at the start of the week, Modestas is one of those guys, a black belt in karate, a black belt in Jinta's combat system, striking. That's his dad. When you look at a guy like Bukauskas strike, the thing that I really like about him, we talked about a fighter that had a background in Taekwondo a week or 2 before. Elise Reed was taking on Jinyu Fry. Why do I like Elise Reed? It's the same reason why I like Modestas Bukauskas. We can strike on the way forward or side to side or on the back foot, and that's what makes Bukauskas special. And we saw Bukauskas get a little bit too comfortable that way against Michael Oleszejczuk, though a lot of people thought that he'd won that fight. The volume numbers are still there. It's just he doesn't really like to sit down on his shots.
And that's the thing. If they do get into a 50-50 fight and you're the guy moving backwards, well, okay, let's say the significant strikes are equal, or you might have a 3 or 4 strike lead. Well, you're moving backwards, and what are the judges going to have in their minds? They're going to think of the other opponent being the aggressor and really forcing the fight. And I do think he is going to maybe not fall into the same trap, but this fight can follow that similar recipe to where Pauga's a guy who likes to move forward. He has good boxing combinations, especially once he's comfortable enough to settle into the fight. So it comes down to how comfortable is Bukauskas moving backwards? Because if he moves backwards and gets stuck up against the cage, this fight could be over sooner rather than later, because Pauga is a guy who will go to the body quite a bit, and I think that's going to be important. Again, Bukauskas can land big power shots on the back foot, so he could still have success, but again, you probably don't want to see him moving backwards because he can have that same level of success moving forwards, and I don't think Pauga's a guy who can fight moving backwards nearly as well as Bukauskas can.
Yeah, and if you saw Bukauskas in that UFC debut, he was doing a lot of fighting on the back foot, up against the cage, landing the Travis Brown elbows, and then ultimately he ends up getting the win over Michailidis. So if you do consider a matchup like this, I know the odds at the start of the week were pretty close on this one. Bukauskas was favored. The fans at Fight Night picked 72%, going with Modestas Bukauskas to get the win in the matchup. Kex ZP, change it. UFC knows what they're doing, putting Pauga early prelims. Boy, is he boring AF, LMAO. You only watch one of his fights. You watch his last fight, because Zach Pauga against Jordan Wright in a co-main event slot pushed a pace and pushed Jordan Wright up against the cage and didn't let Jordan Wright get exciting. So, Matt, Bukauskas' last time out, he was kind of the nail in the first round, but he was the hammer in the second round and in the third round. It looked like Tyson Pedro started to slow down, and where he did, that's where Bukauskas was able to pull away with it. You've seen that big right hand from Bukauskas in the past. He landed that against Pedro in the second round. He landed that against Chuck Campbell in the fourth round of their matchup. He's had some struggles against some of the leg kickers, some of the grapplers in the past, but when Bukauskas pops right back up, gets on his horse and starts striking again, he can be a really fun fighter. So for me, I still have Pauga in the matchup, but this is a really, really tricky one. And if you have Bukauskas, I'm not going to, raise a big stink about it.
It's a tough one to pick, but I do have Pauga. I think he can close the distance when he has to close the distance and use that clinch to sort of slow down the effects of Modestas Bukauskas. And when he's on the middle range, not on the outside, because that's when Bukauskas is quite dangerous, but in the middle range, uses boxing and just gets some good volume numbers.
All right, Matt. Should be a big-time matchup to start this card. Light heavyweight needs fighters. Now, an awesome fight at 135 pounds, and I'm going to say this right now, everybody made weight today. That's awesome to see.
Very nice.
So if you do look at this one, Matt, Dan Argueta kind of making it back down to the natural weight class of bantamweight. Short notice UFC debut against Damon Jackson at 145, and then his opponent fell out, so he gained Nick Aguirre on short notice. They met at 145 pounds. Argueta in those two fights, 1-1, and I saw some people out there this week saying, Argueta lost to Ricky Tercios, LOL, that's a terrible fighter, LOL. But if you go back and watch that fight, it was an awesome fight, and if you consider this matchup, Matt, for Argueta versus Lawrence, both guys primary grapplers, both guys can get it done in the striking, and both guys with sneaky 3-round gas tanks as well. That's why I think this is going to be a very, very fun fight. And it's a tricky one when you're trying to make a pick on it. Now, Ronnie Lawrence is one of those guys. His fight against Amanda Martinez is wild. He drops Martinez. Martinez drops him. Lawrence ends up getting the win. And for Lawrence, coming in, head of steam, the LFAs, the Bellators, all the promotions he's been with, Contender Series and UFC, all those 4 guys were supposed to be in the UFC, and none of them are still in the UFC. So for Ronnie Lawrence, I guess getting a shot against a UFC guy, and when you look at it for Dan Argueta, Nick Aguirre on short notice, not the best of fighters. I think Aguirre will have a decent little run, maybe 4 or 5 fights in the UFC, but I think this is going to be a really fun fight.
To be fair to Lawrence, I do think the skills translate regardless of opponent. Like, he does have good power on the feet. The problem with Lawrence is, I hope he doesn't fall in love with his hands, right? Because his striking is somewhat basic. He has good power in it, but if he really leaves himself open and goes for those bigger power shots, he's going to be hit by cleaner strikers who are a little bit more effective and who do have better hand speed. Not saying Argueta's that guy, I just think as he moves up the rankings. But gas tank is going to be really important in this fight because we've seen Lawrence, he's a guy who can work at a really high rate, especially when he's able to offensively secure his own takedowns. But if Argueta's the guy who's able to get him on the back foot and really hold him down offensively, it'll be interesting to see if Lawrence can fight when he's kind of behind in the scorecards, right? Let's say he loses the first round, loses the second round. He's going to really have to rely on some of those bigger power shots, and I do worry that those could leave even bigger openings as the fight continues. I still have Ronnie Lawrence as my pick in this fight because I do like the overall activity, but I do think we've laid out a good game plan for Argueta. I do think his forward pressure, I think the threat of the takedown, and not only the threat, the ability to secure some of those takedowns is going to be important in this fight.
And that was the thing. Like, I struggle picking Argueta because in a couple of his fights, I've seen him just kind of stand there with his hands at about chin height and wait. And at the same time he's waiting, pop. His neck's kind of snapping back due to jabs and 1-2s from his opponents. And when you look at a guy like Argueta, I love the entire skill set. If he wins this fight, that is a guy to watch. Whoever wins this fight, and really whoever loses, you should keep an eye on them. Lawrence, 26 of 33 in his takedown attempts under that big-time Endeavor banner. If you do have a look at Fight Night picks for the total votes on this one, you can find it in our story, and majority, 61%, going with Ronnie Lawrence to get the win. I do have Lawrence, but this is one of those fights, like when I was watching all the tape and doing my notes, I did have a hard time trying to make a pick on it, but I really am looking forward to it.
It should be a really fun fight. Again, I like the activity from both guys, but I do like Lawrence in the fight.
Clay having a hard time with the old parakeet. Oh, parakeet. Getting the tweet. Parakeet tweet. Yeah, people like the shirt, but do you realize it's like an actual The Sheepdog shirt? I'm a big fan. The Sheepdogs. Matt, do they blaze? They most likely blaze. Matt, Tereza Bleda taking on Gabriella Fernandes. Oil meets water type of fight. Gabi Fernandes, a great striker around the outside. She is one of those tricky sidewinders out of the southpaw stance. When it comes to Tereza Bleda, it's from the camp of I'm taking you down, you're not getting back up again. No Chumbawamba in that one. So, Matt, when you look at it for Bleda her last time out, arguably won the first round against Natalia Silva, slowed down considerably, and by the third round, the hands were down. She got kicked to the body. That was the end of it. When you do compare this fight to some others, Matt, I mean, Bleda, same thing the last time out. Striker versus grappler. Fernandes, striker versus grappler her last time out too against Jazz Divisius. We know how good Silva and Jazz Divisius are. So all of a sudden, we don't know how good Bleda and Fernandes are.
And that's the thing about Fernandes. Can she make Bleda pay for some of those takedown attempts? Because she is the better striker, don't get me wrong. But is it like one punch knockout, big power? No, it isn't. But if she can really accumulate some of the volume and start to damage Bleda when she is going forward, the clinch, and start to going for some of those trips, I think she can have a lot of success. But for Fernandes, it'll be interesting. She could win the first 2.5 rounds and still kind of lose this fight, because for her, I do think it's going to come down to more decision than anything. Her power's decent, her strikes are very good, but again, it really does come down to the accumulation of damage more than anything. So for Bleda, can she just stay committed enough to the game plan of going for those takedowns? Because on the outside, I do favor Fernandes quite a bit, not only with the strikes, but the movement as well.
When you consider it, Matt, Brandor, I don't know if he was listening to us before the show, but before the show, we were talking about Zhumagulov. During the show, we've been talking about Zhumagulov.
Not one, not two.
Big fight against the Fury UFC flyweight champ, Van, the fearless Van, next week. That's going to be a really fun one. I'm looking forward to that one. Another super chat, Matt, from 23
Well,
Break.
you.
Appreciate the time spent studying. Can you get an upset for the night?
Well, one of the picks have probably been an upset. Wasn't the opening
I have
one?
Cannonier. That one's an upset.
There you go.
I don't know. The other one there is one from KEXZP saying, can you guys compare Bleda to another athlete in another sport? She's young. She's hyped. She lost. Who's young and hyped and lost?
This is disrespectful, but I'm going to go for it.
Uri
Matisse-
Slavkovsky. The one thing that she does really well, sniping
number one pick?
takedowns, like Uri sniping goals.
I'm saying
that's about
Matisse
it.
Thibault.
Big for the division, just like Uri's a big guy in his first year and didn't really have the greatest rookie season. Uri Slavkovsky is my Tereza Bleda comp. Similar areas of the world, too. Just a couple countries away.
Matisse Thibault. He plays defense so other people can't score. Bleda with their takedowns, and he's not great. So there you go.
Portland Trailblazers own. Matt, both of us going with Tereza Bleda in the matchup. The next fight, this is one that's really weird because Carlos Hernandez taking on Denis Bondar. Bondar coming in after kind of busting that elbow up against Malcolm Gordon. It was a 50-50 fight, and then he went to post up, and as he posted up, Gordon was putting the pressure on him. Double the pressure, not double the fun, double the bust.
Yeah.
So that's how that elbow went away. But for Bondar, I found it interesting. You know Jay Petrie from over at SureDog, and you know him for the podcast and the articles and the Fight Finder articles with SureDog. We touched on it in our video, but not a ton. The fact that Bondar is listed at 16-4, but on other sites it's like 12-3. So he kind of dove into that one a little bit deeper this week. Bondar's record might not be all that it's snuffed up to be, but if you go back and you watch the Bondar tape, you get a pretty good idea of who the guy is. And you've seen him fight. The fights are out there on YouTube. You can find them pretty well all over the place. He was the GMMA champ in 2019 at bantamweight over Steven Erceg. But again, they're wearing those like practice training gloves that are over the fists. And they're wearing shin guards as well. So pretty cool stuff there for Bondar. But the guy's like a dog on a bone with his takedown attempts, training out of Planet Eater for this one in Germany, Peter Sabata's gym. And for Carlos Hernandez, VFS striking. I saw some people over there in the comments section kind of talk already about Bilal Muhammad. He's trained there in the past. You also have Ignacio Bahamondes out of that gym. Juliana Pena's trained there. I think Macy Barber trained there before Team Alpha Male. Like a lot of fighters out of VFS. Matt Valley, pretty well-known commodity. But when you look at this one, we were split on the pick. But it's a tricky fight at flyweight and a pretty stacked
It
division.
is. It's not necessarily oil and water, but both guys have a definitive area where they will have success. I think the takedowns of Bondar are going to be very important. If he's able to get on the inside and really slow this fight down, I don't want to say make it boring, but use the takedowns, use that top position, and use a lot of those moments in that top position to just try to win rounds. I think Bondar can go out there and win a really convincing decision. But if Hernandez can really bust him up with a lot of those hooks on the way in, and that's the thing about Hernandez, he's got great power to go along with the hand speed, to go along with the volume, to where Bondar, if he doesn't get the respect of Hernandez from the outside and he just starts shooting in blind takedown attempts, it can be a really long night for him and he can get damaged very effectively. But I still think Bondar is going to be able to complete some of those takedowns.
And that's the tricky thing when it does come to this fight. I mean, you look at the combinations that Hernandez is able to throw. You talk about the amateur experience out of both of these guys. Hernandez, an amateur champ, the IMMAF World Championships. We have a debuting fighter on 9 days' notice next weekend who has a similar pedigree to Carlos Hernandez in Jose Chepe Machine Gun Marichal. So what are we going to call him? I don't know yet, but both of those guys, IMMAF champs. And when I talked about this fight at the start of the week and I see it over there, for Bondar, I look at him a lot like Tainara Lisboa, somebody who fought awful competition on the regional scene, but gut wins the way that you want to see them win. So if you do look at this one, Matt, 52% of the fans at Fight Night Picks on Instagram going with Bondar. They see it as very close. It seems to me like this comment section's kind of all over the place on this one too. KEXZP getting a lot of airtime saying not everybody can beat Malcolm Gordon. But again, in that fight, all the pressure on his elbow and his elbow snapped. It wasn't really a Malcolm Gordon move. And Sean B saying Bondar getting reversed easily by Malcolm, but they were slippery in the scrambles. And we've seen that out of Bondar in his fights as well. So this should be a really fun fight. I do have Bondar in the matchup, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I think it should be a really fun fight too.
Who's your pick? You Carlos Hernandez at the start of the week.
I know I did, because I like his striking on the back foot, but the more I think about the wrestling of Bondar, I think he can have a lot of success, and I thought I was going to go with Bondar. I don't think I've switched many picks this year, so I'm going to stay with Hernandez just because, again, I like his striking, but I could be convinced otherwise, so that tells you how close this fight is.
All right, Matt says it's a close fight. We look at Matt Kyung taking on Cristian Quinonez. Two Christians on this card. There might be more. I don't know their beliefs, but there are two Christians on this card by first name. One with an H, like you normally spell it, and one without. And we have the guy without it in this one.
This is what I worry about with Kyung just to switch it over really quick. For Kang, he is a really good athlete for how old he is, right at 35 years old. And not to say he's an ancient fighter by any means, but he really likes to use the athleticism. He's a guy who can force a pace, goes for really big takedowns, he's a really strong fighter. Does his age at this point in his career worry you at all in this matchup?
That's the thing that I kind of referenced at the start of the week, and I'll answer that question. Chandler Witt saying, Carlos is terrible, but you also said, who's the guy you just referenced fighting next weekend? Jose Chepe Machine Gun Marichal. He's coming in on short notice, and he's taking the fight against Trevor Peek. That's a big time fight, man. Hammer fist standing. Trevor Peek. Get excited about it. He's training with, and I'm gonna show the video, and I'm gonna spoil it. Britain Hart. Training with Britain Hart.
Wow.
She's a feeling, Matt. Matt, in this matchup, though, and to answer your question, Kyung, I really like what I saw to him his last time out. Expanded gas tank against a striker, fighting behind double up jabs, 1-2s, and showed really good output as it went along, but the hallmark of his game is his freestyle takedowns and his jiu-jitsu.
So this would be the basketball reference I would have. Very different level of players, but LeBron shoots a lot more threes now, right? He's not as good of an athlete. He can't get to the rim as much. Do you think Kang throwing the jab on the outside has to do with him not being able to get some of those takedown attempts, just due to maybe him slowing down a bit athleticism-wise?
I think it was more due to the fact that it was a short notice fight was thrown again.
No, very well could be. I'm just throwing out there.
But when you do look at this matchup, I mean, Kyung, he's had wild fights in the UFC. His debut against Alex Caceres on really short notice, where he ends up going to split decision and he works the takedowns. That was kind of his bread and butter in that fight. The double knockdown Teruto Ishihara fight at UFC 234. If you consider for a guy like Kyung, he can get it done with his work on the feet and he can be steady. But again, like I said, it's his takedowns and jiu-jitsu that are very good. Cristian Quinonez, not to make the comparison too far, but an Entram gym guy. He does a lot of stuff well. His takedown defense coming on to Contender Series in the UFC, not necessarily the best part of his game, but like his teammate who's on this card, Emmanuel Torres, he can really throw the kitchen sink at you when it's on the feet. A snappy leg kick, a nice 1-2. He's got that weird stance where he puts his right arm up and he throws the jab and then he throws his right hand. So I'm eager to see what we get out of a guy like Cristian Quinonez in this fight. I'm not certainly sold on him just yet, and so that's kind of why I went with Kyung in the pick, but it should be an interesting fight, and I see Night Force saying, no problemo, Quinonez.
I just worry about for Kang, how far is he going to have to shoot those takedowns away from Quinonez with? Because if he's not comfortable on the feet with his jab, really judging that distance well, I think Quinonez is going to be able to damage him a little bit more on the feet. And if that's going to force Kang to shoot that takedown from even, half a foot away, it's just going to make the fight that much harder for Kang. So that's why I have Quinonez in the matchup. I think Kang's going to struggle on the feet just in some of those half beats. I think he's the more complete fighter. I wouldn't argue against that without any doubt. But I do think he is going to struggle with some of the speed and some of the damage Quinonez can bring.
And Joe's saying that Kang looks like a Mortal Kombat character. He went Mr. Long Hair Flow for a little bit, and now he's back to having that short hair swing. So good look for Kyung
Thank you, Chris.
Chris hitting us up in the super chat. Much appreciated to you, Chris. And Matt, 73% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Cristian Quinonez.
And 71 likes, 406 people watching. Give us a like, guys. We'd really appreciate it.
Jimmy Flick almost said Jiminy Glick. Kiefer.
Oh, I love the boy.
Jiminy Glick. I've been watching a lot of Jiminy Glick videos lately. He's taking on Alessandro Costa. The another good one's when he interviews Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and he goes, Richard Dreyfus. And it's spelled differently. But Jimmy Flick taking on Alessandro Costa. A lot of people are hot and heavy over No Costa. I mean, the guy can get it done with his boxing. If you saw his fight that he had on Contender Series, again, he wasn't Joe Pyfer in week 1. He didn't get the contract. He dropped Luna in tight. He dominated the fight on the ground. But if you go back, he has to go back to Lux and then fight for his flyweight title again. It's a leg kick, a left hand, a right hand, and he drops and sleeps his opponent in 12 seconds. So Costa came in on really short notice, about a week's notice, to take on Amir Albazi, and got pieced up on the feet. But that's a top 3 now flyweight in the world, so that's kind of wild. If you do consider this one, I mean, you look at a guy like Costa taking on a guy like Flick. Costa gets it done with his boxing. Flick gets it done with his kicks, and usually if you can dictate kicking range, you win MMA fights, usually. So this will be an interesting one. Both guys, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts in the matchup. It'll be interesting to see because we did see Charles Johnson have success with the boxing against Flick his last time out, though I think Johnson does whip out a kick every now and again more often than Costa. So I think this is going to be a fun fight while it lasts. But again, a lot of fans on Costa in the fight.
If Flick loses this fight, it's going to look really bad. It's going to look like when Chrome Gracie loses. You know, I could see him being on his back, eating a lot of power shots. Not in the way that he's just going to pull guard a lot, but I could see him going for similar types of takedowns. Flick is going to have to get this fight to the ground if he wants to have success. I think the kicks can lead to some of those takedowns, maybe help him close the distance. But if this fight is 15 minutes on the feet, it's going to be a tough night for Jimmy Flick. So I do have Costa in the matchup because I do favor his boxing. But what I will say is it can all look terrible for Flick until it doesn't, because jiu-jitsu is of that level. He does have that one hit, one kill. He can go for really unorthodox positions and get submissions from those positions. So I'm not completely discounting Flick in the matchup, but I just think Costa's going to be able to damage him so much more on the feet.
81% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Alessandro Costa in this one. Todd, Craig's t-shirt is Canadian royalty garb. I mean, listen, just a big fan of the Sheepdogs. I'd say the second best musical act out of Saskatchewan. Next to, I'd say Coulter Wall.
I got nothing for
The
you.
Sheepdogs, a good band. Matt, both of us going with Costa in the matchup.
If you played the CFL halftime show, are you a great band?
I'm trying to think. There's somebody that just played the CFL halftime show recently.
You can't think of them off the top of your head, so how good are they?
Who are the ones counting sheep? It's in the commercials. Somebody's gonna tell me who it is.
Wow.
They played the CFL.
You proved me wrong.
Break. I thinking MMA, Matt. Nicholas Dalby's taking on Muslim Salikov. Love the matchup. It should be a lot of fun. And if you do consider this one, like Nicholas Dalby, the way that he fought his last time out is a perfect blueprint to fighting a guy like Muslim Salikov. He charged the distance. He was able to land greater volume against Warley Alves. It was a close decision win. So if you do consider it an interesting fight there the last time out for Dalby. But for Muslim Salikov, I mean, going out there, finishing Andrea Fialho.
It was impressive.
Not punching him in the face, kicking him to the body. So a big win there for Salikov, a giant one. Dixon Sider saying, do y'all know Mike Malot's brother plays in the AHL? Dixon Sider, the end of the Mike Malott video from last week. I had a picture of Jeff Malott from his hockey DB, and I talked about him playing in the AHL. Yes. Knew it.
Very athletic brothers.
Dalby taking on Salikov. It's a good fight. I think we both took Salikov.
And you're right. You do have to close the distance when you're fighting Salikov, but you can't be reckless with it. Because if you're reckless with it, he's going to counter you. He's going to piece you up. He's going to hit you with a lot of those up the middle attacks that we talk about a lot, right? The knees up the middle, the uppercuts. Because Dalby, I do think, is going to go for more clinch takedowns than double legs or single leg takedowns. He's a guy who will try to use the clinch, throw some elbows, be offensive with that position, and still go from takedowns from that spot. So I do think Dalby's the more likely of the two to go for the takedowns, although I agree with you when you alluded to it earlier. Salikov's a guy who isn't just a striker, right? He can go for the takedown. He can be offensive with his wrestling. So I do think Salikov could go for a takedown, although I just think Dalby's the more likely of the two to go for some of those wrestling exchanges. I just think for Dalby, he's going to be the one to dictate the pace of the fight, but Salikov's going to be the one who makes him pay for going for a lot of those shots.
I disagree with you, and I think if anybody's going to force the wrestling, it's Muslim Salikov. I think he has much better wrestling than Nicholas Dalby.
But I just think his style is going to be more to lay back and go for more of those power shots than go for the takedown.
The coldest take that I think you've ever had just slipped here on the show. From 2010 on, Grey Cup performers, BTO, Nickelback, Justin Bieber, Carly Rae Jepsen, Marianas Trench, Gordon Lightfoot, just an eclectic mix.
The next one, Headley.
My
that's
point
bad.
is, you had to look them up.
Imagine Dragons,
famous.
Fallout Boy, One Republic was who I was thinking of. Shania Twain, Alessia Cara, Keith Urban, the Arkells, the Lumineers, and Kay Flay. I don't know who Kay Flay is.
People after them.
And last year, Tyler Hubbard, Jordan Davis, and Josh Ross. I saw Jordan Davis in February. Good little concert. Matt,
A good little concert for the CFL halftime show?
I saw Jordan Davis.
My point is, if it's a good little concert, then they probably shouldn't be at the CFL halftime show. That tells you the state of the CFL.
Pretty darn good. Yeah, both of us going with Muslim Salikov in the matchup, but a fun one at 170 pounds that could surprise some people
again,
in this one. And these
would you
guys
agree
are
with
just
me?
outside of the rankings.
Exactly. I think you'd agree with me. These guys, not to say it's similar to the main event with where they are in the rankings, but how many more times are Dalby and Salikov going to have these types of fights that can sort of springboard them into the top 15? And even if they win this, they're probably not even going to get that number next to their name. It's probably going to take another fight. So it's an oddly important fight in both guys' careers because, again, how many more chances will they get? And they might not be remembered, but they're like those guys who are 1 or maybe 2-time All-Stars for teams that you really liked. You know, they had memorable careers if you followed them, so hopefully they do get that one more opportunity.
All right, Matt. We move into the next matchup of the night. Manuel Torres taking on Nicholas Mata. And his name is spelled differently than Nicholas. There's 2 Nicholases spelled differently, 2 Christians on the card spelled differently. It's very, very difficult. When you look at this matchup, I mean, for Nicholas Mata, a really nice right hand down the pipe. It's speedy. It's got a lot of snap behind it, a big-time right head kick, and a really nice left hook. Those are some of the hallmarks to Mata. He's got really fast hands, boy, he breaks it and gets in close. And from the distance, again, he likes to throw that kick to try and break things up. You saw it against Gleico Franca on The Ultimate Fighter. He ends up losing that fight by finish. But if you look at Mata, all of his losses, all 4 of them are by finish. But you look at his wins, he's getting finishes. And if you consider for Mata, he threw that right-hand left hook combo, slept Joe Selecki with the 8-6-4 fighting championship. He then loses to Robert Hale, where they had the double knockdown like Matt Mitrione and Fedor Emelianenko, and then it's Hale getting the win in that matchup. But Mata, for what it's worth, a really speedy, swift striker. And if you look at it for Manuel Torres, again, it's like he's got a wick in his arse and somebody lights it every time because he comes out on fire to start his fights, and he's fought paltry levels of competition on the regional scene, and then he beat Frank Camacho in his UFC debut where they gave one to take one, and Frank took too many, and that was it.
I like Torres a little bit to like a Chaos Williams, just because, again, their resumes were somewhat lacking leading up to their UFC debuts. But for Torres, it does come down to, can the skills translate? And oddly enough, maybe even if he wins this fight, it doesn't really prove it. Because Mata's a guy who is hittable, so if Torres wins the fight, he might look like an absolute world beater. He might look like the second coming of Charles Oliveira. We don't really know. Because Mata is a guy who is susceptible to a lot of the attacks that Torres can throw. And if Torres goes out there and blitzes him, really gets him up against the cage, forces him to make quick decisions on the fly, I think Torres can go in there and get the finish. But the real question marks come into can Mata weather that big storm, and what does Torres have after that big storm? Because if Mata is able to be on the back foot, I know you bring up the head kick quite a bit for Mata, I think the leg kick will be important too. If he goes for the leg quite a bit, it's going to not only slow down the movement of Torres, but it's going to force him to not be able to go for as many of those big blitzes that are so important to his game.
I see people in the comments talking, it's Chris and Chandler Witt talking about Yoel Romero. Are you surprised that 46-year-old Yoel Romero got beat by one of the better light heavyweights in the world, Vadim Nemkov? Did you watch him fight Phil Davis? Because he thought that there were 2 extra rounds in that fight. And he looked awful against Phil Davis. And it went to a split decision. And Phil Davis loves split decisions, just like when he fought Beast in 25-8 last night.
No one has ever canceled their Saturday night plans because Phil Davis was fighting Craig.
Babe,
nobody ever.
Let's watch Linton Vassell and Phil Davis.
Sorry, we can't go see your parents, honey. Phil Davis is fighting. That's not a good enough argument.
The only people that are going to say that are Dominic Cruz and Angela Hill. And other than that, people are going to skip Phil Davis.
Phil Davis is a great fighter, but he's like a guy who puts up 12 and 10 in the NBA, and it's all with free throws and like post hooks.
So when you do look at this matchup, Matt, I mean, Manuel Torres goes hard if he goes home. And listen, I mean, sometimes he goes home. But if you do consider it between these two guys, a lot of finishes between them. If we have a look at Fight Night picks for the total votes on this one, if you were to guess, what do you think? I mean, I'm going to guess 72.5% going Torres.
I have Torres in the fight, so I'll go with myself on this one. I'll say 65% have Torres.
You're going to say 65% have Torres, 73% at Fight Night picks going with Manuel Torres. Matt? I'm switching the pick to Manuel Torres. We're both going to get it wrong now.
No.
We're both going to get it wrong. I'm switching from Mata over to Torres, but again, like, I kept watching tape on this and just kept playing with my head when I thought about this fight. Even up until this afternoon when I posted that picture of Mata and Joe Selecki with the fire on their hands in that poster. So some wild stuff there, but both of us in this matchup going with Manuel Torres. And then we get excited for Pat Sabatini taking on Lucas Almeida. The fans like Lucas Almeida in this matchup, Matt.
It's not hard to see why, though, just because of how... I shouldn't say how poor Pat Sabatini has looked. I should say how far off from expectations, I guess, where he is in his career. Because Sabatini's an interesting fighter. We know what his strengths are, right? When he gets on top of his opponents, he has great ground and pound. He has great submissions.
So, like the Mike Tyson punch-out. That's what happened when Jamal Emmers fought Pat Sabatini.
Exactly, but he was able to recover from that big shot, get that top spot. We all saw the submission he was able to complete. He was really good, but he's able to get it into those spots. But for Sabatini, it comes down to what else can he offer outside of those. I thought the striking was somewhat coming along, but the problem is he doesn't have great striking defense, and now his durability isn't all that great, and I think opponents out there know. So if you're able to defend some of those early takedowns, you force him to become a much more limited striker, and that version of him is not the top 15 fighter that I think the total complete MMA Pat Sabatini is, and that's what this fight comes down to. I remember Cowboy Cerrone talked about this when a lot of fighters stopped sparring hard in their training camps. He said, fighting is like that Walmart ticker, that guy who counts everybody who comes in the room, right? Because how many ticks do you have until you just can't take any more hits? And Cowboy didn't want to take a lot of those bigger hits in the training room. So for Sabatini, I'm not saying he's doing crazy hard sparring. What I'm saying is, how many more big shots can he take and still work his way through? I think we are starting to see the limitations of that. So I'm curious to see if this fight will just be another one of those question marks. See if Sabatini gets hurt, can he fight out of it?
So a part of the background that we have right here, people might be able to see that. It's too bright. It says perfect game, 7/28/91. It's a Martinez autographed Expos baseball. Matt, what Walmarts are you going to where they have pitch counters at the Walmart?
No, like clickers for people who come into the store.
Where are they clicking them to?
Cowboy Cerrone talked about this, not me. This is a story he told. Way to ruin the pacing, Craig. But that's the whole thing. People don't have an unlimited amount of chin. Like, you don't just last forever and have ridiculous durability. Amanda Nunes was able to retire on top, right? She was able to retire with a belt and everything's great. How do most MMA careers end? They end like Bigfoot Silva, or they end like Marlon Moraes in the PFL. They end with a lot of stoppage losses and people who don't know to hang it up. For Sabatini, I just wonder how many more big shots he can take before he just starts getting flatlined by them.
People usually tell, usually Bigfoot Silva stopped fighting. I mean, poor Bigfoot Silva, he got finished the other weekend. But when you do look at this one, Matt, I mean, for Sabatini taking on Almeida, again, the fans really going, or the more vocal ones going Lucas Almeida, it's about 50-50.
Rory McDonald, Brandor, that's a good example, too, of a guy who, he just couldn't take any more at a certain point.
And then he started to wrestle late in his career and found success with it. But yeah, it was
But still, even by the end, it's a good example.
But that's the thing for me. Craig Hart brings up a good point. Sabatini loses one fight, and everybody writes him off. Craig Hart, you've been around the comments section long enough. The fans, they do that every single time. So you'll see that every time. For me, I still have Pat Sabatini in the matchup. Lucas Almeida, black belt for what it's worth. His takedown defense is a little bit suspect. I referenced it in his fight that he had against Cucuccio when he was over with Jungle Fights. And he landed great shots in the first round, had his opponent hurt. But then as it went along, he got taken down again and again, and he struggled to get back up to his feet. He ended up getting the win. Don't get me wrong in that one. He looked like 2 weight classes bigger than his opponent. But for me, I do have Pat Sabatini in the matchup. But another one where it gets interesting when everybody thinks that it's kind of closer, 50-50.
I have Sabatini in this fight too, but this could be one of those Ashton Kutcher butterfly effect moments where if he loses this fight and this is kind of the end of the road for him, that's another universe that's out there, right? I don't think a lot of people would be surprised, but I'm really hoping he can get the fight to the mat. Like you said, Almeida's not some zero on the ground, but I don't think your best way to win is being on your back with a guy like Pat Sabatini on top.
All right, Matt. Gotham Knight wants you to get those likes up there right now, and that would be much appreciated. Then we go into this matchup. We have a look at Christian Leroy Duncan taking on Armen Petrosyan.
Matt Adam gets me.
Yeah, saying that a bouncer at a club, not a Walmart, Matt.
But there's just, stores have capacity counters. Any stores could have them. You're oddly specific with some of those.
Very strange. Matt, Armen Petrosyan taking on Christian Leroy Duncan. these two guys are strikers, but in totally different ways. And Christian Leroy Duncan, as is Carlos Hernandez, who's on this card, as is Chepe Mariscal next weekend, IMMAF world champs. And Leroy Duncan, I mean, undefeated as an amateur, he was defeated a few times as an amateur, but undefeated as a pro, and he had an interesting 50-50 fight in the way that Dennis Bondar did against Malcolm Gordon. But when Duncan was reversed in position when he was taking on Dusko Todorovic, he kind of pushed on Dusko a little bit, who flexed on his right knee a little bit too much, or left knee rather. And Todorovic goes down, and that's the end of it. Knee injury for Todorovic. So now we really get the Duncan debut. This guy is an interesting striker. So is Armin Petrosian. He's a Muay Thai world champ. He's an honored master of sports in Muay Thai. And if you look at it for Petrosian, low hands, big wide stance, great kicks, really good hooks on the counters. Sometimes Petrosian waits a little bit too much, but when he lands those counters, they look really good. And sometimes when Petrosian gets outstruck, he becomes a grappler, which isn't awesome for a striker, because we've seen Petrosian in the UFC, and I guess under the Endeavor banner, Contender Series and UFC, struggle with his takedown defense. So I don't think that's going to play a great factor in his UFC career as a big bonus, his offensive takedowns. But in a matchup like this, pretty well striker versus striker, it should be a close one down the wire.
It's a risky way of fighting for Petrosian, though. You know, like moving backwards with your hands down is not the way a lot of people get taught on the way up, I don't think. Now, it does work for a lot of fighters. We have seen fighters have success with it. I'm not saying it's just a complete zero, you can't do it at all, but it's risky when you have the level of striking a guy like Petrosian has, and I do think it does leave just an extra half inch for the window to be open for a guy like Duncan to land, because if he is able to even threaten with the takedowns, and I agree with you 100%, if Duncan, he might not even have to secure the takedown, but it could be one of those situations where with 30 seconds left in a round, he kind of dumps Petrosian, just gets it in the back of his mind to where, okay, Petrosian's not as comfortable planting his feet and throwing with power. He's planting his feet, kind of digging for the underhooks almost in hesitation for the takedown attempt. I can see Duncan faking down, doing the old Chad Mendes, fake for the takedown, and then going for the knockout up top. But I do think the movement of Petrosian is going to play enough of a factor to where it will be more of a strength instead of a weakness for him.
And if you look at it for a guy like Petrosian, again, it's when he's on the back foot and he can't really get those counters working against boxers that he will kind of struggle. But we did see it his last time out against a boxer in AJ Dobson. He was able to have a lot of success, as Mark Coleman yelled in the corner, and the commentary team talked about Mark Coleman the entire friggin' fight. If you look at it for a guy like Petrosian, training back home across the pond with Roman Kopylov, as well as an American Top Team, Christian Leroy Duncan training out of the big-time gym in England with Coach Mark Weir, big-time early UFC fighter. If we look at the total votes for this one, Matt, over at Fight Night Picks, 57% going CLD, so automatically 43% going Petrosian. I still have Christian Leroy Duncan in the matchup. I think that kind of flashy striking can actually get it done in a matchup like this, but if it's flashy strikes that end up getting him caught against thudding counters by Petrosian, that would be a very interesting kind of spot, because for Duncan, UK MMA is definitely really getting there with the UFC going over to the UK quite often, and they've got a card coming up here, next month? So for Duncan, you want to see him get a win in this matchup if you're trying to push him that way, but this is a big time fight. And for Petrosian, the opposite, co-main event spots, he's got a win over Gregory Rodriguez, and then he had that fight against Caio Borralho where his takedown defense was non-existent. I mean, what was it, like 4 of 8? But I still do have CLD here.
I have Petrosian, but again, it's a really close fight. And it's a weird fight to be the co-main event, but hopefully it does shine a spotlight on both of these athletes. I just think, again, the movement of Petrosian is going to leave Duncan into some of those counter shots.
All right, Matt. Then we get into the co-main event of the evening. I think Armin Petrosian beats Joaquim Silva.
It's not going to be close, I don't think. Like, this is my big issue. For Joaquim Silva, he does have a lot of strengths in his skill set, right? But he's one of those people who, if you just look at the strengths, he's great. But if you just want to highlight the weaknesses, they're quite resounding too. He can get taken down. He does go for the power shot, probably a little bit too much on the feet, even though he does have thunderous power. I will give him that. If he can land a huge hook against Armin, maybe he can hurt him and change the tide of this fight a little bit.
That big overhand right that he tries to set up.
Exactly. Like, those are damaging strikes. But the problem is, Armin is just ridiculous with his takedowns, with not only the takedowns he goes for, but with the volume he can go for, and with the cardio he has behind him.
For me, Zarukian, the mix of athleticism and cardio, that's what I think can get it done against a guy like Joaquim Silva. As I said at the start of the week, I don't know who Armin Zarukian pissed off at American Top Team, but he's fought nothing but American Top Team guys the last little bit. And for Zarukian, like, he keeps getting booked against him. Even if the fights fall out, like, he was supposed to have a main event in April against Renato Moicano, whose knee evaded him. So, ultimately, Zarukian finally gets the opportunity against Joaquim Silva. But I think it'll be a fun fight. KEXZP wants us to go with Silva. To me, I'm not going.
It's tough. It's a tough fight for Silva. If he wins, this is a massive jump up in the rankings.
It's one of the bigger upsets you've ever seen in the UFC, and they happen. They
do, exactly.
Maybe Joaquim Silva can beat Arman Tsarukyan, but there's a reason why we don't say that famous L word on the show, because upsets in MMA happen all the time. All the time. Nothing's ever given.
I like Arman in that fight, though.
The main event, Matt, Marvin Vettori taking on Jared Cannonier. Again, people haven't watched their recent fights, and it shows incredibly, because for Vettori's last time out, wins unanimous decision over Roman Dolidze, and in that fight, Dolidze round 1, round 2, lands great volume, lands great power. By the end of the fight, you look at the two guys, who was more busted up? It was Vettori. He ends up getting the decision win nonetheless. He throws good volume on his end. He always throws good volume, and if you consider it between these two guys, Cannonier, if you think that he doesn't throw for any volume, and you think that his strikes don't matter, watch his last fight. It was a main event against Sean Strickland at the UFC's Apex, and in that one, Jared Cannonier lands the more thudding blows over 5 rounds. The power beats the volume of Strickland, and he wins the decision. And I know one of the judges scored at 49-46 Strickland. Nobody scored at 49-46 Strickland apart from that one judge. So if you do consider this matchup, I think it's very, very interesting. It does draw parallels to their last two matchups and beyond. Both of these guys have struggled with guys who move well on the outside and kick. Neither one of these two guys, like, whips it around on the outside and throws the greatest of kicks. Cannonier has really good kicks, but not kicks to all three levels like we see out of Adesanya, Robert Whittaker.
What I do worry about with Cannonier, though, I agree with you that he does have really good volume, but we do see that too kind of switches to him, where he can deflect a lot of strikes. He will be in not a complete defensive shell like Yoel Romero, because I think we saw quite the masterclass of that last night, but Cannonier can be forced into a bit of a shell to where he is thinking quite a bit. He's more on the defensive than he is offensive, so for Vettori, it's going to be a difficult game plan, but he's going to have to throw a lot at Cannonier to really keep those hands up and prevent him from throwing his own offensive strikes, because Cannonier is easily the more heavy-handed out of these two guys. He has the more knockout power. He has good power at weird angles too. I know I brought this up a lot throughout this week, but Cannonier can hurt guys with, like what we bring up, Travis Brown elbows, weird uppercuts from odd angles. He's good at odd ranges, but what I do like about Marvin Vettori is he's just so physical that if Cannonier slows down even a little bit, I do think the work rate of a guy like Vettori with his previous 5-round experience, the fight that really sold me on Vettori was the Hermanson fight. I know that was a little while ago now, but that was the first fight where Vettori hurt him on the feet. He threw a really nice left hand for the majority of that fight, and his work rate was through the roof. He really made Jack Hermanson feel his physicality. He'd force him up against the cage. He just threw a lot of volume. That was the first time where I thought, okay, Marvin Vettori does belong in the elite of the division, and of course, Cannonier can hurt you a lot more than a guy like Hermanson, and Cannonier looked great against Hermanson himself. I just think if Vettori fights in a similar manner to that fight, he can have a lot of success by staying in the face of a guy like Cannonier. I know that sounds crazy, though, because staying in the face of a guy like Cannonier means he can hit you with that huge shot.
KEXZP saying Vettori by KO plus 1200 worth a shot. The last time Marvin Vettori won by knockout was with Venator FC, the same promotion that had one. You know who he is, Matt. Who's the biggest guy that was supposed to be out of Europe at that time? Mel Mack. He had that crazy win where he jumped up in the air, and it was a great feeling for everyone.
This is the big thing about Cannonier, though, and I might as well talk about this fight for another minute, because I'm really interested in this fight. What I like about Cannonier is, and we talk about fighters like this, right, who are, if you're a really good wrestler but you're limited on the feet, they can defend all your takedown attempts and force you to be a limited striker, and if you're somewhat suspect with your own takedown defense, they can go for offensive takedowns. Now, I do not think Jared Cannonier will have a lot of success offensively wrestling a guy like Marvin Vettori, but still, Cannonier is one of those fighters. I wonder if he is going to be able to defend a lot of the early takedown attempts, because for Vettori, I don't think it's going to be enough to be like 1 for 11. He's going to have to be 1 for the first 3, 1 for the first 4, because that will at least make Cannonier not as confident with the takedown defense.
No, I think if Israel Adesanya can defend the takedowns, Jared Cannonier's takedown defense has shown that it is plus in this middleweight division. I have Cannonier, Matt. 74% of the fans have Vettori here in the chat. Fish on just drove by Fredericton on the way to Cape Breton. You got another 7.5 hours left if you're that far. Enjoy that journey, because it's quite the drive. And you missed an opportunity. When you just go past on the Hanwell, if you hit the crossroads, There's a big time, Matt. What sub shops there? Quiznos. Big time Quiznos. Not a lot of those left, but there is one right there. Matt, I mean, overall, again, the fans going with Marvin Vettori. I do think Cannonier, the mix of volume, the mix of power, the fact that Vettori wore it so much in his last fight against Roman Dolidze, and the fact that Cannonier's had success in these 5-round fights. Again, combined 8 main events for these two guys. They're 6-0 together at the UFC's Apex in general. So a lot of experience in that smaller cage for both of these guys. I think this is going to be a big-time fun fight. But again, for me, I do have Cannonier, no switch in this one.
I've got Vettori in the fight. We're just going to be split on this one, I guess. It sucks, though, that middleweight has such a big logjam at the top. And I know by Pereira moving up to 205, that clears up a bit of the division. But it's one of those weird spots where you have the champion in Adesanya, and you've got the forever #1 contender of Robert Whittaker. And unfortunately for both these guys, they've suffered losses to not only the champion, but the kind of de facto #1 contender right now. So hopefully the winner of this does get another shot in that sort of top 5, top 6 space. But look at what's happening to middleweight right now. Guys are starting to fight sort of the up-and-coming unranked fighters. So I'll be interested to see if the winner or the loser of this gets put in a similar position.
The UFC caught on that middleweight is the worst division in MMA. So now they're starting to throw Strickland out there against Abbas Magomedov. Ikram Aliskerov is taking on Paulo Costa. Robert Whittaker taking on Dricus Duplessis. But
That's
other
a good
than
fight,
that, the top of middleweight is a little bit suspect. Listen, I mean, Matt, all over 500 tuning in on a Saturday afternoon. You toss the like. It is much appreciated. If you've hit up the super chat already,
thank you very much.
We thank you. It is customary here at Question Mark Kicks to zip back through all of the fights one more time to give you that opportunity. Fish on saying, watching on the road. And Quizzies, sheesh, that is a hot rip. Cheers. Fish on.
Quiznos gets it.
Fish on a real one.
Gets it.
That chicken carbonara is good. Matt, when you look at this matchup, Zach Pauga taking on Modestas Bukauskas, I don't love the pick. I could see me going 0-1 to start the night. I have Zach Pauga in the fight.
I've also got Zach Pauga.
All right, Matt. Our next matchup, we have Dan Argueta taking on Ronnie Lawrence. For me, I have Ronnie Lawrence, but again, this is a tricky fight for both guys.
I've also got Ronnie Lawrence in the fight, but if he gets out wrestled, then that's going to completely throw a wrench in everything I said throughout the prediction and throughout the week. But I just think the work rate of Ronnie Lawrence is going to be the difference maker in this fight.
Craig Hart's got the heat. Somebody called you out this week. I called you out after the video was done, but the heat, Sandra Bullock, Melissa McCarthy, heat, Val Kilmer.
Nobody thinks of a movie with Sandra Bullock. You think of the greatest heist movie of all time.
It's a box office darling. Matt, Tereza Bleda taking on Gabi Fernandes, going Bleda.
Also got Bleda in the fight.
Then we also have Carlos Hernandez taking on Denis Bondar. I think the grappling is going to take over for Bondar, but a very interesting fight at 125.
I've got Hernandez, but a strong gust of wind could blow me either way.
All right, Matt. Then we also have Kyung taking on Cristian Quinonez. Give me Kang. Kang.
I've got Quinonez. I think he's going to be the more damaging guy in the fight.
Otis, the beefy one, interviewed CLD at 1 a.m. on Christmas Day. Was it also Christmas Day for CLD? Why did he do that? Why did you do that?
Are you like his brother-in-law?
Jimmy Flick taking on Alessandro Costa. Give me no Costa.
I like Costa in the fight too. I just don't think Flick's going to have enough to offer on the feet.
Lord Nikon with a Heat of the Night reference. You big Bryan Adams fan? Matt, Nicholas Dalby taking on Muslim Salikov. Give me Salikov.
I have Salikov in the fight too. I think he's going to have good counters and really be able to strike at the back foot.
In the heat of the night. Bryan Adams. Manuel Torres taking on Nicolas Mata. Switching it up. Give me a loco, Manuel Torres.
I also like Torres in the pick. I think his aggressiveness is going to be able to get him the win.
Heat of the night. Pat Sabatini taking on Lucas Almeida. Don't love it, but I'm going to be going with Pat Sabatini.
I've also got Pat Sabatini, but if this was like Michael Red in 2007, I think it was, when he hurt his knee and it was just over for him, I wouldn't be surprised either, because Sabatini is on one of those weird kind of fork in the road.
Michael Red, Brandon Roy, Greg Oden. Just 3 at the same time.
Michael Red was Kobe Bryant for like a year and a half, and nobody's going to remember because he tore his ACL like 7 times.
They were so good. Matt, Armin Petrosian taking on Christian Leroy Duncan. Give me CLD.
I've got Armin Petrosian.
Yeah, I'm STI. Give me CLD.
Yeah, you don't want CLD. That's why I've got Armin Petrosian.
Co-main event, Armin Zarukian. So you have 2 Christians, names are spelled differently. You have 2 Nicholases, names are spelled differently. You have 2 Armins, names are spelled differently. Give me Zarukian in the matchup against Silva.
I've got Armin Zarukian. I would have Armin Zarukian against a large majority of the people in the top 15.
Marvin Vettori, Jared Cannonier main event. Give me the killer gorilla, Jared Cannonier, to bring a win back to the MMA lab in Arizona.
I'll take the Italian dream, even though it should be the Italian stallion. I like Marvin Vettori in the matchup. Again, I think his aggressiveness might cost him in terms of he's going to eat some big power shots, but when has Marvin Vettori ever been knocked out? Exactly. He's got a ridiculous chin. So if he can absorb some of those bigger shots from Cannonier, I do think his volume is going to be good enough to at least match what Cannonier could throw on the outside.
I'm Manny hitting up the super chat. My weight class 125. I would have been the 123 kid. The 123 kid wrestled at the same time as the Rockers, and I listened to Action Bronson featuring Wiz Khalifa, the Rockers, the other day. Gonna hit you with that drop kick. Marty Jannetty, big fan of that song. Marty Jannetty, his life's gone sideways. While Shawn Michaels, he's aged like in a vacuum here in the last 20 years. It's been something. Matt, a big time main event with Marvin Vettori taking on Jared Cannonier next weekend, and I'll turn the music down on it. But next weekend, there is Josh Emmett taking on Ilya Topuria in that main event. It's an ABC card. It's the 5th ABC card. It's the 6th card from Jacksonville. They did that residency in 2020 that began with an actual pay-per-view that had Tony Ferguson fighting Justin Gaethje in the main event. So a lot to look forward to on that card. A lot of fun fights on that one. There's 14 total right now, but the biggest fight that you should look forward to...
You look like Tobey Maguire when he got the Venom suit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Zhao Gashumagulov
I'm so uncomfortable right now.
Is fighting the fearless Joshua Van. So a big time fight. All my Shumagulov fans, stand up. Everybody's excited about it.
Wow. All my Shumaguls. I don't know what his fan base would be called. I don't know what's happening to my right now.
I didn't know my hair could do this, but Matt, Zhao Gashumagulov taking on Joshua Van, the biggest fight you've ever said. You're going to want to make sure that you check out that video coming up in the near future. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.